You think 1950s housewives needed cookbooks and measuring cups for breakfast? Think again. These women had recipes burned into muscle memory from watching their mothers and grandmothers, dishes so ingrained they could make them half asleep. Let's dig into 30 easy breakfasts 1950s housewives made without a recipe that have disappeared. Creamed eggs on toast was the weekday salvation that appeared on breakfast tables when time was short and pantries were lean. Housewives would melt butter in a skillet, whisk in flour until smooth, then slowly add milk while stirring constantly until a silky white sauce formed. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped roughly and folded into this creamy base, seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a dash of paprika for color. The mixture was spooned generously over slices of toasted bread, creating a breakfast that was filling without being fancy. Children loved the mild flavor, while husbands appreciated something warm before heading to work. The dish required no measuring because every housewife knew the feel of proper roux consistency, how the sauce should coat a spoon. It stretched expensive eggs further while providing protein that lasted through morning chores. This was breakfast born from instinct rather than instruction, the kind of cooking that happened automatically when dawn broke. Fried mush was yesterday's cornmeal porridge transformed into this morning's crispy breakfast through the simple alchemy of a hot skillet and patience. Leftover cornmeal mush was poured into loaf pans the night before, chilled until firm enough to slice into thick rectangles that held their shape. In the morning, housewives heated bacon drippings or butter until shimmering, then laid the cold slices into the fat where they sizzled and popped. Each piece was fried until the exterior turned golden brown and crackling, while the inside stayed soft and creamy. Served with maple syrup, sorghum, or molasses drizzled over the top, fried mush delivered both crunch and comfort in every bite. The dish wasted nothing. Porridge that might otherwise grow stale found new purpose. Children gathered at the table eager for these crispy rectangles that felt like a treat, despite costing almost nothing to make. Housewives needed no recipe because the technique was pure intuition, knowing by sound and smell when each side was properly browned. Milk toast was the gentle breakfast that soothed upset stomachs, warmed cold mornings, and comforted children through fevers and growing pains. Bread was toasted until golden, then placed in shallow bowls where warm milk was poured over until the slices softened but still held together. A pat of butter melted into the warm milk, while sugar or a drizzle of honey added sweetness. Some housewives sprinkled cinnamon across the top for extra warmth. The dish was simple to the point of seeming impossible, just bread, milk, butter, and heat. Yet it delivered a particular kind of comfort that nothing else could match. Sick children requested it because the soft texture was easy to eat, while exhausted mothers made it for themselves during quiet moments before the household woke. No recipe existed because none was needed. The proportions adjusted naturally based on the size of the bowl, the appetite of the eater, and what the morning required. Milk toast represented breakfast as medicine, nourishment as care. Bacon dripping toast was the breakfast that proved nothing should ever go to waste in a proper kitchen. After frying bacon, housewives carefully poured the rendered fat into ceramic crocks kept beside the stove, building a supply of flavor that would season meals for days. Fresh bread was toasted crisp, then spread thick with warm bacon drippings while the fat was still liquid enough to soak into the bread. The result was savory, rich, and deeply satisfying. Toast that tasted like bacon without requiring additional strips. Salt was sometimes sprinkled on top, though the drippings often carried enough seasoning on their own. Children ate these slices with gusto, unaware they were consuming what thriftier times demanded. The technique required no measurement because housewives spread drippings the same way they spread butter, by feel, by appetite, by what the morning called for. This breakfast has vanished partly from changing health concerns and partly because few kitchens still maintain dripping crocks. Oatmeal with cream and brown sugar was the breakfast that got children and husbands through cold mornings when the furnace took time to warm the house. Housewives stood at stoves stirring oats into boiling water, knowing by texture alone when the porridge reached proper consistency, not too thick, not too thin, but perfectly creamy. Heavy cream was poured over each bowl, pooling in white rivers around the edges while brown sugar was spooned generously on top, melting into sweet patches that children stirred through or saved for last bites. Some housewives added raisins during cooking, others served with butter instead of cream, but the basic formula remained constant across millions of kitchens. The dish required no recipe because ratios lived in muscle memory: a handful of oats per person, water twice the volume, salt measured by pinch. Oatmeal was breakfast democracy, affordable enough for any household yet satisfying enough for the hardest working families. Johnny cakes were the cornmeal pancakes that connected 1950s breakfast tables to colonial American kitchens through an unbroken chain of women who never wrote down measurements. Housewives mixed cornmeal with salt, sometimes adding a touch of sugar, then stirred in just enough boiling water or milk to create batter that held together without being stiff. Spoonfuls were dropped onto greased griddles, pressed flat, and cooked until edges browned and surfaces dried enough to flip. The cakes emerged crispy outside, dense and corny inside, nothing like the fluffy wheat pancakes that would later dominate American breakfasts. Served with butter and maple syrup or alongside bacon and eggs, Johnny cakes provided substantial fuel that lasted through morning labors. The recipe existed nowhere on paper because it lived entirely in practice, knowing by sight when batter was right, by sound when griddles were hot enough, by smell when cakes were done. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers was the breakfast ritual that turned ordinary mornings into small celebrations. Housewives lowered eggs carefully into simmering water, counting minutes instinctively until whites set firm while yolks remained gloriously runny. The eggs were nestled into ceramic cups, their tops sliced off with quick knife strokes to reveal the golden treasure inside. Toast was cut into strips, the soldiers meant for dipping into the liquid yolk, each strip emerging coated in rich yellow. Children delighted in the process, the ceremony of the cutting, the satisfaction of the dipping, the creamy reward of each bite. Housewives needed no timers because they knew egg doneness by intuition developed through hundreds of mornings standing at stoves. The dish was breakfast as theater, simple ingredients elevated through technique and presentation into something that felt special without costing extra. Fried cornmeal cakes were the quick bread that appeared when biscuits took too long and toast seemed insufficient for the morning ahead. Housewives mixed cornmeal with flour, salt, and enough milk or buttermilk to form thick batter that dropped heavily from spoons. These dollops were fried in hot fat until bottoms browned, then flipped to cook the other side, emerging as rustic rounds with crispy edges and tender centers. The cakes were served hot with butter melting into their surfaces, sometimes with jam or honey, often alongside eggs and bacon. They were faster than biscuits, more substantial than toast, and required absolutely no recipe because every housewife adjusted liquid by feel until batter reached the consistency her mother and grandmother had taught her was correct. These cakes have largely vanished, replaced by frozen convenience foods that offer none of the same satisfaction. Coffee cake was the breakfast centerpiece that appeared when company was expected, or Sunday mornings felt special enough to warrant something sweet. Housewives creamed butter with sugar until fluffy, added eggs one at a time, then alternated flour mixture with sour cream until batter came together smooth and thick. The streusel topping, butter, sugar, flour, and cinnamon rubbed together into crumbs, was scattered generously over the top before baking. The cake emerged golden and fragrant, its surface crackling with sweet cinnamon crumbs while the interior stayed moist and tender. Sliced into generous squares and served with coffee, this was breakfast as celebration, proof that weekday efficiency could give way to weekend indulgence. No recipe was consulted because proportions were learned through years of making, adjusting, and perfecting. Knowing by how batter fell from beaters, by how topping felt between fingers when everything was right. Codfish cakes were the Friday breakfast that stretched salt cod into crispy patties that satisfied even families observing meatless mornings. Housewives soaked salt cod overnight to remove brine, then flaked the fish and combined it with mashed potatoes, egg, and seasonings until a mixture formed that could be shaped by hand. The cakes were dredged lightly in flour or breadcrumbs, then fried in hot fat until golden crusts formed around tender, fish-flecked centers. Served with eggs, toast, or simply on their own with a squeeze of lemon, these cakes turned preserved protein into something fresh and appealing. The dish required no written recipe because ratios adjusted based on how much fish was available and how many mouths needed feeding. Salt cod was economical and shelf-stable, making it a practical choice for families stretching budgets while still putting something substantial on breakfast plates. Stewed tomatoes on toast was the breakfast that brought garden abundance to the morning table in a form both savory and satisfying. Housewives heated canned or fresh tomatoes in a saucepan with butter, sugar, salt, and pepper until the mixture bubbled and thickened slightly. The warm tomatoes were spooned over buttered toast, their juices soaking into the bread while chunks of fruit provided texture. Some added a sprinkle of basil or a dash of Worcestershire sauce for depth. The combination of sweet acidic tomatoes against rich buttered bread created a flavor profile that woke up taste buds without overwhelming them. This was particularly popular in rural homes where canned tomatoes lined cellar shelves, preserved from summer gardens. Children sometimes resisted the unfamiliar combination, but adults appreciated how the dish stretched pantry staples into something that felt like a complete meal. No recipe was needed because proportions adjusted naturally to how many slices of toast waited on plates. Flannel cakes were the thick, tender pancakes that earned their name from their soft, almost cloth-like texture that distinguished them from thinner griddle cakes. Housewives beat eggs until light, added buttermilk and a touch of melted butter, then folded in flour and leavening until batter formed that was thick enough to mound on the griddle. These pancakes were poured in generous circles and cooked slowly, allowing the interior to set fully, while the exterior turned golden without burning. The result was pancakes with remarkable height and a tender crumb that absorbed maple syrup like fabric absorbs water. Served in stacks with butter melting between each layer, flannel cakes were Sunday morning indulgence that required no written instructions. Every housewife knew the batter was right when it fell from the spoon in thick ribbons, when the griddle sizzled at the proper pitch, when bubbles formed across the surface, signaling time to flip. This was cooking by sound, sight, and accumulated wisdom. Poached eggs on corned beef hash was the breakfast that turned leftover dinner into morning luxury through the magic of a runny yolk breaking over crispy potatoes. Housewives chopped leftover corned beef with boiled potatoes, onions, and seasonings, then pressed the mixture into hot skillets where it fried until a golden crust formed on the bottom. The hash was flipped in sections or stirred to create more crispy bits throughout. Meanwhile, eggs were slipped into barely simmering water, swirled gently, and lifted out when whites set around still liquid yolks. Placed atop the hash, these eggs became sauce when cut, their richness mingling with the salty beef and crispy potatoes. The dish was weekend breakfast royalty, appearing on tables when there was time to do it properly. No measurements existed because success depended on feel, knowing when hash was crispy enough, when water was the right temperature, when eggs were perfectly done. Grits with red-eye gravy was the southern breakfast that married humble cornmeal with the powerful essence of country ham and black coffee. Housewives cooked stone-ground grits low and slow, stirring constantly until the corn swelled into creamy porridge that was neither too thick nor too thin. The grits were finished with butter that melted into golden pools across the surface. Meanwhile, thick slices of country ham were fried in cast iron until browned, then removed while the pan remained hot. Strong coffee was poured into the sizzling drippings, hissing and scraping up flavorful bits stuck to the iron, creating a thin but intensely savory gravy with a reddish hue. This gravy was ladled over the buttered grits, its salty, bitter complexity cutting through the corn's sweetness. The dish required no written recipe because every Southern housewife learned it by watching her mother, knowing by instinct when grits were ready and when gravy had proper depth. Apple fritters were the breakfast treat that transformed ordinary fruit into golden, crispy pillows of sweetness that children and adults alike could not resist. Housewives peeled and chopped apples, then folded them into simple batter made from flour, eggs, milk, and a touch of sugar, Spoonfuls were dropped into hot oil where they puffed and turned golden, the apple pieces softening inside while the exterior crisped. Lifted from the oil and drained briefly, the fritters were dusted with powdered sugar or drizzled with maple syrup while still warm. The smell of frying dough and cooking apples filled kitchens with an aroma that brought everyone to the table before being called. These were autumn breakfasts when apples overflowed from orchards, but housewives made them year-round using whatever apples were available. No recipe was consulted because batter consistency was judged by how it coated the fruit, and oil temperature was tested with small drops of batter. Scrapple was the breakfast meat that proved Pennsylvania Dutch thrift could create something genuinely beloved from parts others discarded. Made from pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices cooked into a loaf, scrapple was sliced thick and fried until the exterior turned impossibly crispy while the interior stayed soft and savory. Housewives heated skillets with butter or bacon fat, laid in the gray slices, and waited patiently while crusts formed. Rushing meant mushy scrapple, and no proper cook would serve that. The finished slices were served alongside eggs, with maple syrup for those who liked sweet-savory contrast, or simply with salt and pepper. Children either loved or hated the distinctive flavor, but those who loved it craved it forever. The dish required no recipe because slicing thickness and frying time were learned through practice, through watching mothers who watched their mothers. Prune whip was the light, airy breakfast that housewives prepared when something sweet but virtuous was needed to start the day. Stewed prunes were pureed smooth, sweetened lightly with sugar, then folded into stiffly beaten egg whites until the mixture became fluffy and cloud-like. Chilled overnight and served in small dishes, prune whip was often topped with a dollop of whipped cream or a sprinkle of chopped nuts. The texture was remarkable. Light as air, yet satisfying, sweet but not cloying, with the prunes providing earthy depth. Housewives favored this dish because prunes were considered healthful, keeping digestion regular, while the preparation felt elegant enough for company. Children sometimes needed convincing, but the whipped texture often won them over. No recipe was written because success depended on beating whites to proper peaks and folding gently enough to preserve the air that made the dish special. Cheese dreams were the breakfast sandwiches that turned simple ingredients into something children begged for and adults secretly craved. Housewives buttered bread slices, layered sharp American cheese between them, then fried the sandwiches in butter until bread turned golden and cheese melted into stretchy strings. The technique was identical to grilled cheese, but the name carried morning magic. Calling them dreams made breakfast feel special. Some housewives added thin slices of ham or tomato, but purists kept to bread, butter, and cheese alone. The sandwiches were cut diagonally, the better to see the molten cheese oozing from the center, and served hot when the contrast between crispy exterior and gooey interior was at its peak. No recipe existed because every housewife knew proper grilled cheese by the sound of butter sizzling, by the color of toasting bread, by the moment when cheese reached perfect meltiness. Cornmeal pancakes were the heartier alternative that appeared on tables when regular flapjacks seemed too delicate for the work ahead. Housewives combined cornmeal with flour, added eggs and buttermilk, and stirred until batter formed that was slightly grittier than standard pancake batter. Cooked on hot griddles, these pancakes developed crispy edges with a tender, slightly coarse interior that provided more substance than wheat alone could offer. Served with butter and sorghum syrup or alongside bacon and eggs, cornmeal pancakes fueled farmers, factory workers, and growing children through demanding mornings. The corn flavor was subtle but present, a reminder of the grain that sustained American families for generations. No measurements were written because housewives adjusted cornmeal to flour ratios by preference, adding more corn for heartier cakes or more flour for lighter ones, knowing by texture alone when batter was right. Eggs in a basket was the breakfast that made children giggle and adults smile at the simple cleverness of cooking egg inside toast. Housewives cut circles from bread centers using drinking glasses or biscuit cutters, then placed the bread frames in buttered skillets. An egg was cracked directly into each hole where it cooked contained by the bread while the toast fried golden around it. The cutout circles were fried alongside, becoming perfect yolk dippers. Flipped carefully when bottoms set, the finished product was served whole, a piece of toast with a fried egg built right in. Children loved the novelty, the way it looked like a face or a frame or whatever imagination suggested. The dish went by many names across different regions, but the technique remained constant, passed from mother to daughter without any need for written instructions because the method was obvious once you saw it done. Dutch babies were the dramatic breakfast that puffed impossibly high in the oven before deflating into buttery, custard-like perfection. Housewives whisked eggs with milk, flour, and a pinch of salt, then poured the thin batter into a smoking hot skillet already slicked with melted butter. The pan went straight into a screaming hot oven where the batter performed its magic, climbing the sides, billowing into golden peaks, creating a crater in the center. Pulled from the oven, the Dutch baby was immediately dusted with powdered sugar and squeezed with fresh lemon juice, the combination of rich eggy pancake and bright citrus creating something between breakfast and dessert. Children watched through oven windows with amazement as the batter rose, making this dish as much entertainment as nourishment. No recipe was needed because the ratios were simple, equal parts egg, milk, and flour. And success depended on oven temperature and timing that housewives learned through repetition. Cream-chipped beef was the breakfast that fed soldiers during wartime and families during peacetime with equal efficiency. Housewives made a simple white sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, then adding milk until thick and creamy. Paper-thin slices of dried, salted beef were stirred into this sauce, their intense saltiness mellowing as they warmed through. The mixture was ladled generously over toast, the creamy sauce soaking into the bread while the beef provided chewy, savory bites throughout. The dish was filling, economical, and quick, exactly what busy mornings required. Dried beef kept for months without refrigeration, making it a pantry staple for households that valued preparedness. Men who served in the military recognized this dish immediately, though they called it by a far more colorful name. No measurements were consulted because the white sauce was made by feel, knowing when flour was cooked enough, when milk created proper consistency. Buckwheat cakes were the dark, earthy pancakes that filled farmhouse kitchens with their distinctive, almost nutty aroma before dawn broke. Housewives kept crocks of buckwheat batter fermenting on counters, feeding it with more flour and water each night so it stayed active and ready. In the morning, a portion was ladled onto hot griddles where the batter spread thin and cooked quickly, developing a slightly sour tang from the fermentation. These pancakes were darker than wheat versions, with a robust flavor that stood up to strong maple syrup and salted butter. Farm families preferred them because buckwheat grew in poor soil where wheat struggled, making it an economical choice. The fermented batter required no leavening. The wild yeasts did all the work. And no recipe was written because the process was learned through doing, through maintaining the starter, through knowing by smell when batter was ready. Rice griddle cakes were the thrifty breakfast that transformed last night's leftover rice into this morning's crispy-edged pancakes. Housewives mashed cold rice with eggs, a splash of milk, and just enough flour to bind everything together. The batter was dropped onto hot griddles where it spread into irregular rounds, the rice grains creating a texture unlike any wheat pancake. The exterior crisped while the interior stayed tender and slightly chewy, each bite offering the comfort of rice in an unexpected form. Served with butter and syrup or alongside eggs and bacon, these cakes stretched resources without sacrificing satisfaction. The dish was particularly common in households where rice appeared regularly at dinner, ensuring nothing went to waste. No recipe existed because proportions adjusted based on how much rice remained and how many mouths needed feeding. Housewives simply added enough egg and flour until batter felt right. Bird's nest eggs were the breakfast presentation that turned ordinary fried eggs into something children found endlessly delightful. Housewives shredded potatoes and formed them into ring shapes in hot skillets, creating nests that crisped on the bottom while holding their form. An egg was cracked into the center of each nest, where it cooked surrounded by golden potato strands. The whites set against the hot potatoes while yolks stayed soft, ready to break and run through the crispy nest when cut. Served straight from the skillet, these edible nests made breakfast feel like an adventure. Children ate every bite, including potato bits they might otherwise have ignored because the presentation transformed mundane ingredients into something special. No recipe was needed because the technique was visual, knowing when potatoes were shredded fine enough, when nests held shape, when eggs reached proper doneness. Tomato gravy with biscuits was the breakfast that stretched garden abundance into something rich and satisfying when meat was scarce. Housewives started with bacon drippings or butter in a heavy skillet, whisked in flour until golden, then added chopped tomatoes, fresh in summer, canned through winter, letting them break down into a thick, savory gravy. Milk was sometimes added for creaminess, and the whole mixture was seasoned simply with salt and pepper. Split biscuits received generous ladlefuls of this pink-orange gravy, the acidic tomatoes cutting through the richness while the flour provided body. This was poor day breakfast, appearing when the smokehouse was empty, but the garden or cellar still offered something to put on the table. Children learned to love the unusual combination, while adults appreciated how it filled bellies without emptying pocketbooks. The gravy required no written recipe, because proportions adjusted naturally to available ingredients. Fried apple rings were the breakfast that celebrated autumn's harvest in the simplest possible form. Housewives cored firm apples and sliced them crosswise into thick rings, then fried these circles in butter until both sides turned golden and the flesh softened slightly while keeping its shape. A generous sprinkle of cinnamon sugar while still warm transformed the rings into something approaching dessert, though they appeared alongside eggs and bacon at proper breakfast tables throughout the season. The apple's natural sweetness concentrated during frying while the edges caramelized, creating fruit that was both familiar and somehow elevated beyond its humble origins. These rings were particularly beloved during apple season when orchards overflowed and families needed ways to use the bounty. Children requested them by name, and housewives obliged because the preparation was quick and required no recipe, just knowing when butter was hot enough and when apples were properly cooked. Dropped eggs on toast was the streamlined breakfast that delivered poached egg satisfaction without the fussy technique of true poaching. Housewives brought shallow pans of salted water to a gentle simmer, then cracked eggs directly into the water without swirling or vinegar tricks that fancy cookbooks recommended. The whites spread slightly before setting around the yolks, creating eggs that were perfectly cooked but less pristine than restaurant versions. Lifted carefully with slotted spoons and placed on thick slices of buttered toast, these eggs broke to reveal runny yolks that soaked gloriously into the bread below. The dish was quicker than proper poaching, more forgiving of distraction, and equally delicious when hunger called. Working mothers particularly favored it because eggs could cook while toast was being buttered and coffee poured for the family. No recipe was consulted because the technique was purely intuitive, watching whites set, knowing exactly when yolks reached the preferred consistency. Cinnamon toast was the breakfast that proved the simplest preparations often delivered the deepest comfort to those who needed it most. Housewives toasted bread golden, spread it thick with soft butter, then showered each slice with a mixture of cinnamon and sugar kept ready in shakers beside the stove. The warm toast melted the butter, which mixed with the spiced sugar to create a sweet, slightly crunchy coating that children adored and requested again and again. This was sick day breakfast, snow day breakfast, any day breakfast when something sweet and warm was needed without much effort or expense. The aroma of cinnamon filled kitchens with a particular kind of welcome, announcing that someone cared enough to make morning feel special. Every household adjusted their cinnamon-sugar ratio to family preference, some favoring more spice, others more sweetness. No recipe was written because the technique was taught by watching, learning how much butter, how much sugar, how the coating should be spread. Baked eggs and cream were the elegant breakfast that appeared when housewives wanted something special without tremendous effort or complicated techniques. Individual ramekins were generously buttered, then an egg was cracked carefully into each one and topped with a spoonful of heavy cream that pooled around the edges. A sprinkle of salt, freshly ground pepper, and perhaps some grated sharp cheese went over the top before the dishes were slid into a moderate oven. They baked until whites set firm, but yolks remained gloriously runny beneath their creamy coating. Served with crisp toast points for dipping into the rich yolk, these baked eggs felt like restaurant food despite requiring almost no skill to prepare. The cream enriched everything it touched, creating a silky sauce that made each bite luxurious. This was company breakfast, Sunday breakfast, any morning worth marking as different from ordinary weekdays. No recipe was needed because doneness was judged simply by watching through the oven door. Enough of all this savory stuff. Let's go towards something that's actually sweet. Believe it or not, people had incredible tricks and tips for that. One of those was a rice and molasses bowl, which is the kind of dish that just inspires gentle waves of nostalgia in you. It's something that's drizzled with thick, dark molasses. The molasses, which makes for a very bittersweet, smoky bite with sweet undertones, tends to seep into the grains. This actually gives them such a nice autumn-coated color that really just makes you want to set up your best sheet in a park, call a few friends, and enjoy the small things in life. Historically, though, this was nothing that was so romantic. It was a poor man's breakfast and dessert, especially in most parts of the South and the Appalachian regions. It was very common to see among working-class Northeasterns in the 18th century, and it was something that was relied on to stretch ingredients when things were running low. This is because molasses was always really cheap and bought in bulk, and if people weren't growing their rice, they were stocking up on as much as they could. Rice, molasses, and different kinds of bowls are now bygones of different times, but they were really good. Boiled barley porridge is one of those breakfasts that just feels like a pat on the back from a mentor, a hug from your best friend, or a call from your grandparents asking you to come over and try some of that breakfast you always love. It's also something that's built to last you at least until the middle of the day. You make boiled barley porridge by simmering hulled or pearl barley into water and milk, and then you get a soft, creamy texture that almost melts in your mouth. Flavor-wise, though, it's pretty nutty and kind of similar to oatmeal. You get a chewer bite and a bit more earthiness out of this, but it soaks up almost any kind of syrup or liquid you throw at it, as well as spices. That's a big part of why this dish is as flavorful as it is. We're talking about some serious ancient history when we discuss its origins, though, like this is the kind of thing that goes way further back, to the times of the Romans and medieval peasants. In the United States, it's something that was popular first in rural areas and immigrant homes, but each country has its own history with barley. Unfortunately, across this list, you'll find all sorts of final nails in various coffins. For malasadas, it was just competition and bad PR. This Portuguese banger involves fried donuts that are really rich and decadent, but also really heavy and a little hard to make. You can kind of see where I'm going with this already, can't you? The thing is, Americans are pretty much creatures of habit. If you try to break away from that habit, you better be offering up gold on a plate, but if your plate consists of fried donuts with more of a regional appeal in states like Hawaii, then you might not make the cut. Another thing about Hawaii is its thriving Portuguese community, so a dish like this was always right at home there. But what about everywhere else? People thought it took a lot of work to make this dish, which would also leave you feeling pretty sluggish and bloated, plus the short shelf life really didn't help matters. People are used to their donuts lasting a long while, but with malasadas, the texture and flavor would go up in smoke pretty quick if you just let them catch dust on a table, and eating all that in one go was never really ideal, especially if we're talking about a workday. Mix that in with the whole wave of healthy eating, and you can understand where the bad PR side of things comes from here. Since I can't stop thinking about sweets, let's circle back to them for a bit. Applesauce bread. Applesauce bread was one of those sweet, comforting recipes that made a comeback in the Great Depression when butter, sugar, and milk were hard to come by. Applesauce was cheap, easy to make, and could substitute for many of the pricier ingredients in baking. Applesauce added moisture and sweetness to bread without needing lots of sugar, butter, or oil. Pretty much all the good stuff that people didn't have access to. You'd mix it with flour, baking soda, and whatever spices were around. Cinnamon was the best, but you had to be lucky. This was the perfect recipe to create a dense, cake-like bread that was perfect for breakfast or dessert. And let's not forget the applesauce itself. it was a hero in its own right. People made it from leftover or bruised apples that would have otherwise gone to waste. So, not only was applesauce bread thrifty, but it was also the original waste-free, eco-friendly breakfast. Plus, it could be easily customized with nuts, raisins, or anything else you had on hand to make it stretch further. In a time when dessert was a rare treat, applesauce bread brought a little sweetness into some pretty tough days. Salted herring with potatoes is a dish that is built entirely on contrast. The briny meets the bland, and strong undertones meet soft aftertastes. The herring itself is something that's preserved in brine, right? So it's deeply flavored. It's firm when it comes to the flesh, it's slightly oily, and that tang isn't for everyone. But an honest-to-God seafood lover is going to enjoy the life out of it. The dish itself is something that's most commonly served cold, slightly warmed, or just with a side of elegant mashed potatoes. As elegant as they can be when they're made by a frustrated mom who just wants to get the table set up, really. A bit of chopped onion, sour cream, and dill, and you'll be remembering your mom's cooking soon enough. You know, salted herring with potatoes has always been something that's deeply considered a working-class regular, especially in the American Midwest and Northeast. It was so common to see this in coastal communities where fresh fish were always abundant. Preservation was something even kids could tell you about. Salted herring let families eat protein year-round, and potatoes were cheap and easy to grow, and they could be made into 1,000 different things. Tallow fried potatoes are the OG French fries. They're insanely flavorful. They have that beautiful golden sheen to them, and they're about as crispy as you would want the perfect batch of French fries to be. A lot of that color, vividness, and flavor comes from the fact that they're fried in rendered beef fat instead of vegetable oil. Now, back in the day, and I mean way before the 80s, fast food joints like McDonald's were actually using beef tallow in their fries as well. That was a big part of what gave them that original iconic flavor. Tallow helps potatoes achieve a savory flavor that they would never be able to get to on their own. Plus, this just isn't there today with the modern oils we have. The best part really was the exterior, because a simple first bite was about as close to nirvana as you could get. If you were eating these when you were borderline starving, then you were pretty much about to have the best food experience of your life. Tallow was the go-to frying fat for a lot of American diners and fast food kitchens, and it's just not hard to see why. And then, competition from the citrus side of things is unexpected when you think about cranberry-orange muffins beating out the largest pancakes you've ever seen, but anything's known to happen during lunch in America. The thing with those was that they didn't really give us too much over what we already had, but this is a stellar example of how to do exactly that just right. It was a staple in cafes, homes, and even bakeries, and really, it dying out is no fault of its own. Sometimes it's just a sign of the times and changing trends that knocks these winners off of their thrones and leaves them in the dust. Does that mean this is a recipe that isn't worth your time? Not at all, especially if it got its rep during the 70s, where good and new food was definitely not in short supply. You don't even have to worry about the seasonal thing anymore since you can just get oranges throughout the year now. It's probably still got some die-hard fans in a few areas here and there, but cranberry and orange as a combination lost steam throughout the later half of the 20th century. I have quite a sweet tooth today, and I wish I could say that's because that time of the month is approaching. But, oh well, no excuses for me. Coming in on number 3, we have peanut butter muffins. This probably sounds familiar, and that is because you've most likely heard every health-oriented TikToker or Instagram influencer mention it at least once. It is quite popular in today's day and age, and not for bad reasons. But during the Great Depression, they weren't as luxurious as they are today. Quite the contrary, they were literal lifesavers. Peanut butter was cheap, packed with protein, and easy to store, making it a go-to ingredient for stretching meals. The muffins were a genius creation, made from simple pantry staples like flour, sugar, and a big scoop of peanut butter. They didn't need eggs or butter, which were often hard to come by, and they baked up into a hearty, slightly crumbly treat that filled you up for hours. The peanut butter provided a rich, nutty flavor, and you could eat them for breakfast, lunch, or as a snack, midday or midnight. They weren't just about the taste. They were supposed to give you strength for the day, and that's exactly what they did. They were a practical, budget-friendly way to get in as much protein as possible when times were tough. And come on, who doesn't love peanut butter in any way, shape, or form? Cold potato with an onion salad was basically the chic way to go vegetarian back then. The dish had a subtle charm that heavily relied on the texture and seasoning. It was also ideally served chilled, because, well, science. I'm just kidding, but basically, the starch starts to firm up. This gives the potato a much more dense and sometimes waxy bite that contrasts really well with the creamy dressings. It also works spectacularly with the flavors present in an onion salad, which honestly adds the perfect crunchy element. Cold potatoes can feel like a mush fest after a few bites, so having some alternative textures in there really helps smoothen everything along. Historically, cold potato and onion salad is something we likely derived from 18th century Europe. This is a pretty traditional recipe in German and French circles, and leftover boiled potatoes were always dressed in oil, vinegar, and herbs so that waste could be avoided. American potato salads are something that evolved from these traditions, and they gained a lot of popularity by the time of the 20th century as a potluck, picnic, and community dinner staple. Milk toast is also pretty much exactly what you think it is. Back in the old days, it was so much more common for people to take an intentionally frugal approach to how they spent their food, and especially the kind of hacks, snacks, and dishes they would come up with. All of these ideas were centered around being able to make the most using the least amount of time, energy, and ingredients possible. Milk toast is one of the best examples of that, because imagine if you tried to make the most out of some milk or some bread before it was about to hit those pearly gates and become fully expired. Yeah? You can't really figure out what to do, because while you'd normally just eat them on their own separately, this time that doesn't work. You just go ahead and get milk toast ready. The best part is that it works in 3 different ways. You get a nice healthy meal that's a pretty good breakfast or an interlude meal before your next big meal. You get to save money because you're not letting anything go to waste, nor are you buying something new because these ingredients are probably on their last legs, and you get a pretty lovely dessert out of it too. What's not to like, really? It's kind of insane how convenient milk toast can really be. Sometimes things just get old, and sometimes they just don't work. We've had our fair share of both, and scones with clotted cream and jam are a bit of a mix of the two. Now, US and UK cuisines don't generally tend to mix, even though we've had lots of crossovers in the past now. Scones with cream and jam, at least these ones that would use clotted cream, were the quintessential British snack. If your idea of John, 32 from West Virginia, is somebody in plaid or flannel getting real intimate with a hot dog, then your idea of Martin, 28 from Birmingham, is somebody in a blazer enjoying a scone. It's just what we associate with the people, you know? These scones were something that immigrants from the UK brought on over with them, and don't get me wrong, in their parts of the country where there would be large British-American presences, it definitely was something that got a lot of mileage. In other places, it just wasn't really that much of a hit, and clotted cream wasn't really something a lot of people had access to. Kind of a bummer when your core ingredient ends up being in short supply for the masses, but maybe this one staying a niche secret is a good thing. I'm not the biggest scone fan after all, but this is all about you, so how do you feel about this little treat? Coffee soup, the liquid breakfast of the hard times. Coffee soup was one of the more unconventional Depression-era breakfasts, but it made sense when you think about the times. Coffee was cheap, which might come as a shocker since it is so expensive now. It was also widely available, so when families didn't have much to eat, they turned it into a meal. The recipe was dead simple. Pour a cup of strong, hot coffee over a slice of day-old bread or crackers, and there you have it, breakfast. Sometimes sugar or milk would be added if they were available, but more often than not, it was just coffee and bread. This was a quick and easy way to stretch a little coffee into something that felt a lot more filling than it looked. Coffee soup wasn't exactly gourmet, but it gave people the energy boost they needed to start their day, and it was a comforting routine when other breakfast options were out of reach. The bitter taste of coffee combined with the soft bread created a unique flavor that grew on you after a while. I am a coffee addict as much as the next person, maybe even more, but this may be the tipping point for me. but I guess it's kind of like a tiramisu, only without the cream filling, right? Maybe I would try it. God only knows it can never be too much coffee. Beef kidney stew is a rich, earthy dish that has a lot to bring to the table. Bold, distinctly old-fashioned flavors and more protein than your muscles probably know what to do with. It gives a really deep umami base. It has a little bit of a mineral flavor, slightly metallic. You know, that's par for the course when you're dealing with actual meat. But you throw this into a skillet with some slow-cooked onions, garlic, red wine, and bay leaves, and you'll end up with this incredibly exotic-looking stew. Dark, glossy, and full of flavor, it's something that has a velvety texture also, thanks to being thickened by flour. The chunks of soft, tender carrot and potato in there also give it an incredible contrast that the dish really needs. Now, historically, this has always been a staple of the working class, especially when you go into the 19th and 20th centuries. Today, beef kidney stew is something that's not really relevant outside of the usual TikTok bringing back age-old recipes. Lard biscuits are pretty much the heroes of old-school baking. If you actually look at it from a historical lens, these unapologetically flavorful biscuits have kept way more bellies full than something like turnips. No, but really, lard biscuits have been a generational safety net for when a hunger pang is about to turn a bad day into a bad week. Lard biscuits were the go-to in Southern kitchens for the longest time, even before butter became a staple ingredient in the area. Folks would keep tins of drippings on the stove, but most of the lard was preserved, not because people had to ration it or because they were running awfully short, but because they just liked it that much. Lard biscuits are something you don't see around anymore, but during several of the past few centuries, as well as notable periods like the Great Depression and the World Wars, lard biscuits were man's best friends. These size extra-large pancakes, on the other hand, have all the star power you could want in something that migrates its way from German tables to American couches. Dutch baby pancakes are exactly how you make a first impression on a foreign audience. Appeal to the familiar, bring in the new, and find a balance between both. Flavors that Americans typically hadn't ever associated with pancakes were suddenly on the cards for them, and that went for textures too, because this really didn't feel like any pancake your mom would whip up or one available in a diner. These needed a preheated oven and had to be baked for a lot longer. One pancake per person isn't the rule here. This is very much a group meal. Unfortunately, you have to have a lot of confidence in your recipe if your aim is to shake up America's love for its convenient pancake-oriented breakfasts. These pancakes weren't as customizable because they couldn't be mixed directly into the batter, and they took a lot more time to make than regular ones did. Americans think of pancakes as a quick, perfect breakfast before work, and that's the situation they often find themselves craving one in. This did not fit that memo, and for a few more reasons like competition from other, more convenient and trendier options of the era, Dutch baby pancakes fell off. One of the most popular breakfasts of the time was Depression donuts. Forget your regular Krispy Kreme order and start writing this down. Depression donuts were all about survival since people back then weren't really rolling in dough, pun intended. But with minimal ingredients like flour, water, baking powder, and maybe a spoonful of sugar, these donuts became like a gift sent from above. Since eggs, butter, and milk were often scarce or expensive, people improvised with what they had. For the preparation, you'd mix up the dough and make it into little rings or balls depending on your preference, and fry in oil until golden brown. The results were immaculate. But if you've never fired donuts, don't expect this to be easy peasy, lemon squeezy. You have to be careful because that oil will fool you. You think you're the one in charge, setting the stove temperatures and being all fancy. But once that oil is hot, there's no telling if you are frying or burning those donuts. So be careful, because donuts are no joke. Mutton fat bread is something that's unapologetically itself. It's too rich, too deep, and it has all the meaty flavors you could ask for. The essence of rendered sheep fat is unmistakable here. It's something that goes perfectly well with day-old bread, slightly dry, a bit hard, and coarse. You know, the entire 9 yards. This is as rustic of a dish as it gets. It absorbs the hot fat in this dish and it crisps on the outside while getting extremely soft on the inside. This dish is something that you would see really commonly whenever you would pass by factory towns or farms, especially among rural laborers, such as people in the 19th and 20th centuries. They were sheep farming regions like the Appalachia, Wales, or the Highlands, and mutton fat was an extremely common ingredient in these areas. That's because it was always far more cheaper than butter, or just a lot more flavorful than lard. The ideal material for frying. The fried bread was also a good way for people to stretch meals, and although some people didn't vibe with the overly gamey taste, back then it was considered a standard of most red meat-based meals. Let's talk crackling cornbread. This is the cornbread that absolutely doesn't mess around. Like, this is the supersonic of cornbread. This is that rugged, crispy-edged cousin of your typical cornbread muffin, and it brings with it all the rustic charm that cornbread is always known for. Crackling cornbread has always come from the innovative kitchens of the working class, and this is especially true in the South, where using anything less than all of the hog was considered culinary blasphemy. Wasting fat? You may as well hang up your butcher knife. It was about no waste, and cracklins were a prime example of why that mentality worked. These were gold, and stirring them into cornbread only made them shine brighter. It made the bread a lot more filling and gave it extra protein, and you needed that because if you were coming back from a day of shoveling mud, then you definitely needed something for those muscles. It was a proper lunch though, and it was even better with some fresh greens on the side. Crackling cornbread is something that pretty much has faded into the background nowadays, but it was the perfect kind of thing for when you had nothing but a skillet, an empty stomach, and a lot of grit and determination to make something worth eating. It's a 10 out of 10 for a lot of Southerners, and nothing's really changing that. Here's another evident case of something losing to its betters. Caramel rolls. Much like how Dutch baby pancakes lost in the long run to the standard, nostalgic, and ever so timeless regular pancake, caramel rolls could never overtake cinnamon rolls. They were pretty good for what they were, and they even made a pretty decent name for themselves in cafes and bakeries. Caramel rolls had it all initially. They were really nice. They had sweetness, nice packaging, good marketing, all the things you'd need to really get yourself out there in the wider world. Unfortunately, there were a few reasons they just fell a little short of cementing themselves as a staple of American eating and baking that would last well into the 2000s. They were also messy and hard to make, and while the sweetness was a plus point, it also made them really calorically dense and bad for you in the larger picture of things. See, by this point in time, the American masses were glucose veterans. They went through ice cream parlors, soda fountains, the golden age of fast food chains, and so many other things that really racked up the damage they were doing to their bodies just through their diets. As a result, as time kept going on, people started to abandon things like this, which were just excessive. Plus, good old cinnamon rolls do the job so much better, and they're not really that bad for you as long as you keep it under control. Moving on to something less fun: egg and potato hash. Egg and potato hash was the ultimate Depression-era breakfast because it was cheap, filling, and easy to throw together. Potatoes, one of the most budget-friendly foods around, were diced and fried until crispy, then mixed with scrambled eggs. If you were lucky, you might throw in a little onion or whatever leftovers were kicking around. Bits of ham, maybe even a stray vegetable. The beauty of this dish was that you could stretch it as far as you needed. Not enough eggs? No problem. Just add more potatoes. The fried potatoes added that crispy texture, while the eggs brought in some much-needed protein to keep you going through the day. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was warm and hearty, plus it kept everyone fed and happy. Egg and potato hash was the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and could easily turn a couple of basic items into a satisfying breakfast that made you feel like you weren't missing out, even during tough times. Bacon fat griddle cakes are something that are pretty much just pure, smoky nostalgia. They're the right kind of greasy. They're visually stunning, and they're full of so much flavor that you'll wonder why people stopped making these in the first place. The best part? They're so good to make on a budget. All that's required for this recipe is some flour, milk, eggs, and just a tad bit of cornmeal, sugar, and maybe molasses if you're really feeling like a dessert king. You're going to have got really old school with the griddle. You take leftover bacon grease instead of any butter or oil, And once your cake's shape is completely done, you just slap them on the griddle. What you get for all your hard, strenuous work is a very crispy-edged, savory and sweet pancake that has a lot of smokiness to it. Each bite feels like a crunch, but the exterior is what's really worth talking about. Obviously, you'd expect something like this to have a fluffy inside, but the exterior is just the perfect start to a delicious bite. Hot water fried cornmeal cakes are an old-school Southern staple that don't really get even half the love and attention they should these days. I just want you to visualize a crispy, golden brown cornmeal cake with the most incandescent exterior you've ever seen, and then a tender, soft center that just leaves you wanting more and more. But it's natural, and even good, to get curious. And when you hear hot water fried anything, your first instinct is to immediately go like, wait, what? And I really wouldn't blame you. The practice of making cornmeal cakes this way is something that actually goes back several centuries, right back to the enslaved African Americans in the South who were making the first versions of these. Without access to proper feed, not even leavening, they found a way to make do with just cornmeal and water, and these were also known by a much more popular name, hoe cakes. Now, in the end, they started to fall out of everyone's go-to cooking preferences, but I think cornmeal cakes have one more comeback in them, despite it all. Eggs Florentine was supposed to be this entirely new spin on Eggs Benedict. But see, when your entire selling pitch is that the new spin in question is just spinach, it doesn't really end up pulling its weight in the larger landscape of American eating. I mean, don't get me wrong, this thing shelled out more brunches than anyone expected it to, and it was a dynamite item on a lot of menus. But was it ever going to last past the wave of health-conscious suburban moms vying for the next optimized caloric deficit? And who would come up with it? Not really. It was a great dish, and it did some interesting things with hollandaise sauce, but overall, this little bit of English tradition could never really find a home within American neighborhoods, on their tables. Plus, the entire point of a fresh new take is to offer something different from the original. But as it stood, a lot of people just preferred their typical Eggs Benedict compared to Florentine. Staying on the sweet side of things, we'll be talking about the ultimate zero-waste recipe, banana bread. Back then, letting food go to waste was practically a crime against humanity, and banana bread was the best solution for those overripe bananas to be saved. Instead of tossing them, creative cooks found a delicious way to use them up. They mixed them with flour, sugar, and a bit of baking soda, and created a nice, dense loaf of heaven. Eggs and butter were optional, and people often replaced them with whatever fat they had lying around. The natural sweetness of bananas made it a budget-friendly alternative to other desserts. Plus, banana bread was highly versatile. You could throw in nuts, raisins, cinnamon, or whatever odds and ends you could scrape up to stretch it even further. Banana bread was one of those Depression-era foods that stuck around to this day, and it's for good reasons. It is the epitome of a sweet, delicious, but healthy treat that has got everyone in a chokehold. It is healthy and packed with nutrients, while still remaining tasteful and filling. No wonder all those cooking influencers are making banana bread every other day. Gee, show us another recipe. Rolled oats and bacon are a really humble and delicious combination. It does two things very perfectly. It balances the comfort of a cream-heavy dish with the allure of smoky flavors. Now, that's not very hard to do, but I think when a dish makes that work, it's always one for the notes app. The oats are something you simmer slowly in water and milk. You know, the usual preparation. You have to wait until it becomes completely porridge, though. Stir in these crisp crumbles of bacon, and suddenly the dish transforms into a wonderful savory fantasy. You get to have this decadent texture with just the tiniest bits of smoky aftertaste, and it makes for a dish that just feels like the perfect autumn or winter breakfast. Historically, though, this is a dish that you would actually find more often in the summer times, when people were really trying to stretch out their meals and scraping for protein. Especially in the early 20th century, when rationing meant that almost everyone had to think conservatively about what they were eating and how much of it they were using. The savory oats bowl couldn't ever go mainstream, but I think that suits the quiet nature of the dish. You ever have leftovers, but you don't want to make what you had last night? If your leftovers happen to be potatoes, mashed or otherwise, then potato cakes are your hero for today's Saturday dinner. Potato cakes are the ultimate leftover glow-up, and they're a fine example of how putting a little bit of faith, time, and creativity into what you think is nothing that special can actually result in a killer dish. Potato cakes are made from mashed potatoes that have been mixed with a generous bit of flour, egg, and then shaped into patties until they're golden brown. Just think of them like hash browns, or at least like a distant but more nostalgic and comfier cousin of hash browns. The flavor is what you would expect, but it's honestly more buttery than you would think too. You're really going to have the time of your life if your original mashed potatoes that are left over were made with cream or garlic mixed in, but even if they weren't, that's always a step you can add later. Potato cakes were the gift of several immigrant communities that were putting down roots during the 1800s and 1900s. This is a dish that's been shared among Irish, German, and Polish families, so everybody has their own take on it, and I know boxed mashed potatoes and freezer meals are what everyone goes for today. But this still beats all of that. I wish these were the sweet kind of muffins, but unfortunately they're not. We are going to get to know one of the breakfast staples of the Great Depression era, carrot muffins. Some might say that this was a sweet way to sneak some veggies to the table. With butter and sugar in short supply, people used the natural sweetness of carrots to help flavor their muffins, creating a sweet and moist breakfast without breaking the bank. Now, I get that carrots have a sweet taste to them, but I wouldn't call this meal sweet unless someone added some sugar to it. Not much, just a little would be enough. These muffins were also super versatile. If you had some cinnamon or nutmeg, you could spice them up. Or if you had some raisins or nuts, you could throw them in too for some extra flavor. They were an affordable, filling option that got people through hard times and got some vegetables into kids' mouths and bellies. Not a total parenting waste, don't you think? Just kidding, it was an epic parenting victory. Any veggies that somehow get into kids' hands is a win-win situation. Which forgotten breakfast would you bring back to your morning table? Drop your memories in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane with us.